And what you're describing is exactly what is going on between Russia and Ukraine.
Exactly.
And why the British are in it up to their neck.
Absolutely.
They know
why Israel,
they're gone.
Iran, all of it.
Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
Tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes a duty. So said Thomas Jefferson. Go to bit.ly/lawful tax protest or bit.ly/make war history and find out why it is a criminal offence to pay central government or local government taxes in the UK. bit.ly/lawful tax protest or bit.ly/make war history. And let's make war history. Hey EM, hey Graham, thank you so much for making yourselves available for this conversation. I've been looking forward to it. And Graham, you've been on my channel before because you are the leader of the English Constitution Party. And EM, you are a former Green Beret and a writer and a commentator par excellence. And you blew my mind and that of many, many others in our last conversation about who's really running the show, who's behind the shadows. So I thought it'd be great to get you guys together. Graham, do you want to start by introducing yourself briefly, and then EM, you introduce yourself, and then we'll take it away.
Oh, so I am. So there's two organisations, and without using titles, I'm just a normal, everyday working person, right? There's nothing special about me apart from the fact that the state attacked me 30 years ago, and sitting in a prison cell, instead of being violent and turning all your energy against these people, I decided, give me all your law books out of the library, and I'm going to sit here, read the law, and start fighting back myself, right? And that's exactly what I did. Probably come from boxing training years and years prior to that. The point being, I run two organisations, the English Constitution Society, which is about educating people of their constitutional rights and common law rights, where they come from in English history. And the second is an English Constitution Party. And that is, just to make sure the audience are aware, the brand is England and the manifesto is the English Constitution. And that's how it should be. You represent your constituents in Parliament against the Crown. If you've got a grievance against the Crown or a grievance against the executive, as the Americans say, you've got a grievance, you're there to air that grievance. That's your job, not to represent a political party, right? So, and again, technically it's illegal under the English Constitution to do that, to represent anyone else other than your constituents. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what I do.
Fabulous. And I'll have the links in the description below. Ian?
Tech, finance, special operations background. I trying to bumble my way through, trying to understand what the hell's going on. And while we're all going insane, when we actually talk to each other, we generally kind of like each other, with some exceptions. But you know, I think at the simplest, I think Fukuyama was utterly and absolutely wrong with his end of history, because we're all still living in it. Never ended. We didn't somehow magically step into some alternate universe or some alternate reality. We all come from where we come from. All those things are in motion. And so that's who I am. I've got a background in AI, doctoral studies, and all kinds of other rubbish that nobody really cares about. So
yes. And then in terms of your, I suppose, political commentary and financial commentary, and you're going to be coming on X Space with me on Wednesday, the 25th of June at 5 o'clock British summertime with the Coin Republic. We're talking about the financial kill chain. And then you and I got talking because I was just interested in the history and the mechanisms by which the City of London has all the power that it has, and who's behind the City of London. How did that come to be? And then it just all made sense in that video. It's like, oh, William and Mary, the 1688 Bill of Rights. And Graham, you and I did a video a few months ago about, on my channel, because you do videos on your channel, about the English Constitution, because England does have a written constitution.
It most certainly does, and,
Yes.
and I can actually show you one of the books. Yes, this is not a green screen. This is a real law book.
See, I can't do that, right?
No, I don't do AI, and I certainly don't do AI with law at the moment. Although the Americans have got quite a substantial database, much better than anything that the British have got. But yeah, so there is two lots of written constitution. That's the statutes, and then you've got, and then on the floor next to me, because I've actually got a current case in the Royal Courts of Justice. You've also got another group of books, which is the Halsby's Laws of England. That's so in effect, you've got the statutes, and then you've got the common law of England. Two separate elements.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, take it away, Graham, because you were talking about how you've come across EM's work before we started recording. I thought, should we just start recording?
Well, so let me just say to EM, I watched the video and it was on Rumble. So most of the people out there, Rumble is probably more a free speech platform than anything else out there. It's the only place that hasn't took me down so far. Right now, I've got 8,000 subscribers. And yet YouTube has took me down continuously. There's certain things you say on there that are too near the truth. You're gone, right? Simple as that. And by the way, Twitter has done the same thing to me. So all this nonsense about Elon Musk being, the great freedom of speech person, he is not. Because all I talk about is the Constitution and people's rights. Not just here, but in America as well. So I watched a video, and what intrigued me and triggered, I said triggered is probably the wrong word to use. In other words, when I heard this, I went, go and watch this guy, right? Because he actually knows what's going on, right? And that was when you made a comment. I'm going to simplify the comment. And you basically said President Trump is in between two groups of people and he's pushing them apart because they want to fight each other. One group, if you want to call it that, are fascists and the other group are communists. And he's in the middle saying, I'm neither, right? We are neither. We are Americans, right? We don't want your ideology in America, right? Yeah. Well, that's exactly, and I can read it from the law books of England, what an Englishman is. An Englishman is not interested in your ideology of oppression and suppression and statist rules. What we are as independents and individuals, and we look to the country and the constitution. That's it, right? And all of these other things. But you basically paraphrased it on there and said that's what the problem is. And then but I've been telling people that for years, right? There's this big problem, and there's two groups of people. Sometimes I go deeper. And again, I like the fact that I haven't read all your stuff, by the way, because I've been literally under cosh with a couple of court cases in the High Court, in the Royal Courts of Justice. And there's lots of little bits and pieces that people understand. But I try and say to people, I mean, if you're on YouTube, I probably won't be able to say it anyway. But
this is going to go on Odyssey and Rumble and Free Speak.
Oh, right. So there are a number of issues that I look at. So the first thing, I've come to a conclusion, and this is with a psychologist.
Right, great. Hold on a second. Let me give Ian, before we go into another idea, give Ian a chance to respond to what you originally said. And we talked about this in our original video, Ian, about the nature of the English and in its cultural heritage as expressed within its constitution and common law.
Yeah, I created a meme on that the other day, actually, that's Make England Great Again.
Yes.
So absolutely, fundamentally, what does it mean to be English, right? It's not an ethnicity, again, as we have talked. There is no ethnic English. It's a mix of ethnicities of the area and the time and the region, etc. But it is a set of precepts, and it's really rather very simple. There's only three, and they're all predicated upon the first: individual sovereignty. Each individual, from the king to the common man, the most common of common men, is individually sovereign. And which comes with that, which came out of the English or the Scottish Enlightenment several, millennia later, or almost a millennia after Alfred the Great laid all this down and coded it, was that you have to have responsible individual sovereignty. It's not enough to just be, individually sovereign. That was one of the things that the Scots very much clarified. But what makes us English? We are each individually sovereign. And it was a king that told us that, and a king that coded that into the laws, right? So from the very beginning. The second piece of that is that you have to have the right to private property, because you can't be individually sovereign if you don't own your own thoughts, your own emotions, your own labor, right? The fruits of your own productivity, whether that be, whatever form that takes. The third precept then that's necessary to make the first two possible is there has to be a balance of power between the king/government. Today we call it parliament, with, as you referenced earlier, the king merely being the executive, although he hasn't been the executive since 1688. The princes, which is your wealthy elite, your oligarchs, and we got to be careful because, oligarchs and princes are very, very different, although I think they're coming together again. I believe hereditary princes are already here amongst us in the form of multi-generational family offices, right? We just haven't sussed out yet that, well, you need to start acting like nobility, and that's really the focus of what I'm doing. And the people, right? You have to have a balance of power. So there has to be a balance of power in order that people can maintain their right to private property and their private property. And you have to have the right to private property in order to be individually sovereign. Now, again, I'd add the Scottish part, not just because my mother's a Scot, but responsible individual sovereignty. You have to be responsible for you and whatever the produce of your labor, cognitive, emotive, physical, is. You need to be responsible for what that impact that has on the world around you and other self and others. So I fundamentally agree.
Yeah, and again, there's a couple of things that I'll make just to make sure my position's clear on this, right? When we talk about ethnicity, right, I am not what's known, because I believe it to be unconstitutional, as an Ethno-nationalist. Right?
Yeah, no,
I don't believe you can be an Ethno-nationalist
and be English.
and be English, right?
No, you can't.
But the Acts of Settlement did say this, and it was the British that removed it, and by doing so, that it was a direct attack on the English culture.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And what they removed was something in the Acts of Settlement that said, by the way, this was ultra-vires and unconstitutional. They weren't allowed to do it, but they did it by stealth, right?
Yep.
And they removed a particular phrase, and that is that you can only, and we'll get back to Prince of Orange because it's specific to him and his people.
Baddie.
Right? So there was a particular reason why they put this in, and it was that you can only have a position of power. You can only be a member of Parliament. You can only be in the House of Lords. You can only be a judge. You can only be a police constable or any position of profit, right, from the state, if you are born of English parents, plural, right? It doesn't mention race. It does mention religion, but it does not mention race. And the reason why it did that was because, and again, a lot of people don't realise, King Billy, in a lot of things he did was fantastic, and some of the things he did was not so fantastic, right? But one of the things that they did was because they was Dutch, and that means they was the same race as me, right? They started putting all their people in positions once they had come over and they was invited, right? They started to put their people in positions, and once they did that, right, they started to rob us. And not just of our rights, but also of our money. And they started to put people in these positions where we said, "Stop! You're not doing it." And that's why we brought out the Acts of Settlement, which was extra to the English Bill of Rights. Not extra as such. It was. Some people say that the Acts of Settlement is more important than the actual Bill of Rights. In some ways, it is.
The Bill of Rights is hollow because it's never been upheld. It's a wonderful document, a wonderful argument.
Well, that's so basically it has been upheld in various cases. I mean, Lord Denny,
yes, but as a whole, overall, so
it's the British. Yeah, right. There was a separate element to that. So what happened in 1706, 1707 when they created the Acts of Union, which by the way, and again, Thomas Massey was the person who come out with this. Thomas Massey was fantastic. He actually did a 5-minute video explaining to people what a treaty was. And he said a treaty is sovereign to sovereign, not sovereign to subject, right? And he said this like he was literally in a Congress, I think it was, where he actually explained it. 5-minute video, and I said that's perfect. He's just told you exactly what the Acts of Union is, and what the Acts of Union was for was to protect the two separate constitutions as separate jurisdictions and nations of England and Scotland, right? And then it's been hijacked. I could tell you what group of people have hijacked it, but it's been hijacked, and they've used that as a weapon against primarily England, right? And what they've started to do is to destroy the common law, right? Because that's the enemy to them. The common law.
The dooms of Alfred. You've got to remove the dooms of Alfred. You have to bring over a puppet king who has no power, and Billy, as you say, I call him that orange bastard, but and it's really his traitorous wife that's the real doom of the English and the English civilization. You bring over a king that has no power. You put all power in Parliament, where you can quite literally just buy parliamentarians. That's a very old thing. Weren't they buying senators in Rome?
Yeah.
Right? And in Athens, right? And you put all power. So what you do is you bring over a puppet king, you put him on the throne, and his traitorous wife just wanted a house upgrade, right? So and then you bind the king with by making him a constitutional monarch, whereby he has no power whatsoever over the creation or the adjudication of laws. That's all in Parliament. And you give all power to Parliament, which you own. And then you set about, under the imprimatur of the crown, doing all of this, but the crown hasn't done a damn thing since Charles I. And you gut the English civilization, and then you corrupt it from the inside, and you use it as your martial power around the world to collect on your debts, to go steal assets, and you deny Englishness, everything that has to do with Englishness, by doing this second great psyop, the first one being the Glorious Revolution. It wasn't a revolution, it was a coup. And it was 7 bought-off nobles and an entire class of bought-off parliamentarians. And they brought so that was the first psyop, calling it the Glorious Revolution. I call it the Inglorious. And the second great psyop was this whole British bullshit.
So if you go and look online anywhere, you'll see lots of memes from us that literally say that the British is a psyop. It's a major psyop.
It's exactly to deny us sense of ourselves as a civilizational people. Because our king, our great king, Alfred the Great, we even call him the Great, right? And it really started under his grandfather Egbert, had been in the court of Charlemagne.
Yep. Was
a very literate man. Read Latin, read the Greek, right? And he did not want, and even though it was 300 years on, there was still the remnants of Rome in the British Isles at the time. That didn't just suddenly disappear, right? It wasn't like everything Roman just disappeared. That was still lingering. And Egbert, and others were like, yeah, we don't want to be Roman. We don't want to repeat that system. We don't want to be under that civil law structure. We don't want, total and absolute power, and we don't want praetorians, and we don't want any of that. And so it developed, starting with Egbert, his grandfather, and I can't remember his son and Alfred the Great's father, but they began this process of codifying what is it to be English, right? This concept of English, and it had to bring a bunch of different peoples and cultures and communities together, from the Danelaw, from the Angles, from the Saxons, from the Jutes, the Frisians, the Britannies, the Scotti, all these people, and how do we weave that together into this single conceptual whole, and then bind everyone from the king, from the king to the lowest, in a common shared framework that is in direct refutation to the slave concept of Europe, the Roman concept of Europe.
No, that is exactly what I tell people. People don't get that.
Then how do you codify it and set it loose as a belief system, as a structured belief system? And that was the dooms of Alfred. That was the birth of common law. Now, there's antecedents to common law that came from the Danes, that also came from the Anglo-Saxons, etc. So there was already some of the concepts of the sharing of power, etc., and common law, no man is above the law, etc. And then 400 years on, or roughly 400 years on, they fight that out with the barons fighting a king who was married to a French woman, right? Trying to make, trying to make remove the English, the basic core of the English, and introduce civil law and taxation and all the other things. And the barons and the people stood up and fought, and we preserved the Englishness. 400 years on from that, we have, starts with the Civil War, and then culminates in the Inglorious Revolution. We fought that again, and we lost. And we lost that fight. And we've been occupied at the top ever since, because this is what the Praetorians do, going all the way back to Augustus, right? Caesar Augustus, after him, by the way, up till Constantine, is these parasitic slavers know how to control a people by owning and controlling the top. And then putting all of it under branding and PR and marketing and psyops, all this image of legality and structure and balance of power, etc., and the constant, ever-present threat of a knife in the back of your kid on their way to school if you don't stay in line, even if you're a king.
And I don't disagree with that part. So just to make sure the audience is aware of this as well, because King Alfred is crucially important to this.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, pause 1 second. Terribly sorry. There's one other key piece there. He translated everything into English. So terribly sorry. I didn't mean to.
And he did. The other person to do that was Cromwell, because people don't realise that Cromwell told the English. He didn't just sort out the king. In terms of chopping his head off, he also sorted out Parliament, and he said, get out of this Parliament. It's the people's Parliament. It's not yours. But he also sorted out the judges, right? Because he said, you will not speak these other languages in an English court.
In the court. So I want to quibble with one piece there, though, right? Because it is important to the conversation. I personally believe that the last English king was Charles I, and that he was standing up for the people, and he was trying to prevent this that was happening on the Thames River with the industrialist and the buying of, fighting Pym, who was bought and owned by the Dutch, and all of this. And there were many nobles that were trying to, fight and support, Englishness as well. But, unseasonal rains kept them out of London. The bully boys, so it was just, he was in an impossible situation. Cromwell comes along, and there's another parallel to this. Napoleon, by the way, later, right? But Cromwell comes along and is like, okay, yes, we've got to take this king down. This king's bad. This is, all this stuff's happening. But once the king had been beheaded, and Cromwell's now firmly, rounded up, killed up a bunch of the nobles, and is now firmly in control, he realized, holy cow, Charles was right. Charles I was right. And somebody's got to pick this crown up out of the gutter and put it on and wear it. And exactly what Charles had been saying, we have got to disband Parliament because it is corrupted and owned by Amsterdam. That's what he was saying. What he was trying to say as carefully as he could, right? And so Cromwell then disbanded Parliament with a brilliant statement. I can't remember, but by God be gone or something, right? And then absolutely he made sure the judges spoke English in the courts and wrote everything in English so that the common man, who were fairly literate, could participate. So I'm totally with you, but I just wanted to quibble the one piece because I think it's absolutely essential we realize that our last good king, who actually stood and fought for the people, lost his head for it. And that whole argument around him and Charles, etc., is a psyop specifically also to deny us Englishness and our heritage and history.
Right, so there's a number of things that you brought up there, but at first is King Alfred, and people don't realise how strong English justice is, right?
Yeah.
So under the common law of England, King Alfred hanged 44 judges who perjured their oath, right?
Yes.
So he was telling people, you're not getting away with this. If you do this in my name, I will hang you. And he did, right? So that's
publicly.
the first. Publicly, and again, people don't realise. I can go back in history to.
Oh, Eva, I believe you, Graham. I wish we could do that nowadays. Carry on.
Oh, I think we're getting there.
but again, if you say these things online, your video gets taken down. That's the thing that people realise. What English law is fantastic, and it's there to protect you as an individual against the power of the state. Yeah. That's what it's there for.
Yeah, against the slavers. Let's call it more specific.
The slavers.
It is, because that's what they are. And it's not just the state. That's also some industrialists and bank. The thing about English culture and civilization, unlike any that's ever that I know of, and I've studied a lot for 50 some odd years, unlike any other civilization I've ever known, Englishness and all the concepts and ideas and the laws, etc., are specifically oriented to one thing: that the individual is not enslaved.
That's it. Yeah.
Period.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Go on, Graham, please carry on.
So on the other, with Charles I, and so first of all, just to make sure you're clear, I'm not a historian, right? So I'm not a David Starkey. So David Starkey sometimes talks complete nonsense, and he butts in to with his history of what king was doing, what princess or whatever. I'm not interested in that. What I look at is the law, and during their reign, what happened, what was enacted, and how it affected our liberties, because that's how you can tell who was in control. It's not necessarily the king. It's the people. It's the puppet.
It's the court. It's the court. It's almost always the court. And in this case, court is now parliament and has been since the 1600s.
So again, when you actually read through the Bill of Rights, it never says anywhere that it is a psyop, a complete psyop, that Parliament is sovereign. It is not sovereign. There is a separation of powers.
Yes.
And it is never, ever promoted. I go in front of judges all day long and they say to me, Parliament's sovereign. And I say, no, it isn't.
No, it isn't. Now, here's the problem. They brought over a Dutch king, put him on the throne, a paper king, and they've owned his security and all of his successors' security ever since.
Yeah.
To keep the king from executing his prerogatives.
Right. So, and again, there's a book here from someone called Sir William Wade, right? He's a scholar of English law. He's now deceased. I think he died in 2004. And he wrote a book for someone called the Hamlin Lectures, right? So all these lectures are online. You can go and read them, right? Yeah. And in that book, it's called Constitutional Fundamentals. And in it, he actually expresses what is actually sovereign in England is the separation of powers, otherwise known as the Constitution of England. That's what's the sovereignty, right? And it's been hijacked. So if you get one element like Parliament, by the way, just to the audience listening to this, we've got something in English common law called contempt of statute and contempt of sovereign. And those two laws are imprisonable. If you turn around and say Parliament is sovereign, technically you're committing a criminal offence and will be put in prison by a judge who knows his job, because you're not even allowed to say that, right? Because it's not sovereign. Basically, we are the people. And it's obvious when people think about it, right? That why we are sovereign and not them, not least of which is the jury, right? So, again, going back to these kings, I mean, there's a couple of things you've just said there about slavery, right? So I've tried to tell people, what you don't realise is the British Empire is an extension of the Roman Empire, right? That's what it basically is, just an extension of that. And there was only two people. There was just two people, right? There was the plebeians, which is up, like not us, but the middle class. Then there was like the masters or the and I forget what they call them. There's a funny name for it. I think you've already said it, right? And then there's another subclass, and the subclass are slaves, right? That's it. They're the three people. And if you're not in the two higher classes, then you're a slave. That's the Roman system.
Yes, it's the European system.
That's the European system, and that's what the English have always fought against. We've stood up and said, we are not slaves to no one, right?
But we have been since 1688.
Well, so
increasingly,
so there are elements of what you've said there. I mean, I'm talking about the law, not the actual history of it. But there were elements where a certain group of people, I mean, on most things, I try and say it in a different way, but we call them the little hats, right? So the little hats, if you go back to the 1290s, right? There was 3,000 little hats living in England, right? what they did was decided to start counterfeiting our currency and create a financial implosion of England, because they basically used their jewellery skills. They clipped currency, which is called debasing the currency, which is now why you get milling, and they then made gold plate. They then got a plate of tin, and they gold plated the tin, and they pressed out their own coinage, and they was using it in Europe. Europeans then found out our money was worthless because of what they was doing. They was cheating. So the king sent out to the whole of England. He said, go and round these people up that are doing this, because it's hanging offence, right? So they've gone out and they're counterfeiting their currency, they're debasing the coinage, etc. So he sends them out, and he brings back 600 to London. And out of the 600, which is 20% of the population, right, who are what I would regard as financial gangsters or financial terrorists, whatever way you want to put it. It's been there a long time. That's what they do, and usury, by the way. So he pulls them in and they're put on trial. By the way, all these records exist, right? The actual original records of the trial still exist, and that no one wants to talk about it, right? You get called an anti-little hat if you mention it, right? So what happens then is they go for trial, and 300 get found guilty with evidence. By the way, they tried to burn down the abbey that was storing the evidence, right? And they hung 300 of them. Right? There's various other instances where this problem has happened, and then they was banished from England. Right? We don't want you here. We don't want you usury. We don't want this. Get out of our country. You're causing too many problems. Right? And part of, and this is the bit that people, even if because I speak highly of the glorious revolution, but from a legal standpoint of the English Bill of Rights, people don't realise that he was financed and controlled by this other group of people in Europe, and it was basically them coming back in.
So I'm gonna put this in a slightly different frame. While I understand I'll put this in a slightly different frame. My perception of it. Okay. What we are dealing with is the same Praetorians that owned and controlled Rome from Caesar Augustus to Constantine. In 312, Constantine crushed them. Those some few who survived with the wealth that they could retain fled to the lagoons of Venice and created Venice. That's where the Venetian Empire comes out of.
Okay.
The Venetian Empire, out of revenge to Constantine, brings down the Byzantium Empire with the Fourth Crusade and a whole lot of other efforts that happened in the other Crusades. These are Romans. These are Praetorians. These are not tiny hats or whatever. All right. Now, do they use them? Do they whatever? Right. Probably. Right. We got bad people in every freaking race. Right. Every ethnicity, every group. We got gangsters. Right. Like Rich likes to say.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. But the Praetorians had been defeated. They knew how to control empire at the top. They knew how to control the currency, and they did the very same thing in Rome. And it wasn't the tiny hats that did it. It was the Praetorians. They debased the currency. They did all of this.
Ian,
By the 1400s,
you want to say, just very briefly, what do you mean by the Praetorians?
The Praetorian Guard.
That class of people.
So how does the Praetorian Guard work? It's your security. But it's the guys who guarded the emperor. How many emperors were murdered by the Praetorian Guards? How many magistrates? Because they guarded magistrates, senators, nobles, generals, right? They were, for all intents and purposes, your intelligence community and paramilitaries of the age, right? Your highest trained, most capable, etc. But what they really were was this mafia. And they controlled the emperor, the empire, as a mafia from behind the scenes by just controlling the top. Well, they went to Venice, they built out an empire, they brought down the Byzantines. That, unfortunately to them, because they don't think that far ahead, they don't care, because they're just going to move to another host and do the same to them. Yep. By the 1400s, they weaken in the Fourth Crusade, Constantinople, Byzantium, can never recover, because they stole something on the equivalency of 60% of the treasury or 80% of the treasury, and it could never recover. And in that, they also destroyed all of this artwork, vast amounts of artwork that had been saved out of Rome, right? Vast amounts, statues, everything, just destroyed it, right? To wipe out any trace of Byzantium of having legitimacy, okay? 1400s, 15th century, they have to go somewhere else because having brought down Byzantium flooded the Islamic invaders into that part of the world. And Venice was too hot and they couldn't maintain their empire anymore. Well, where else was there that was just like that? Amsterdam. And it had a mercantilist republic with a notional, nobility and monarchy. And so they went there, 15th century, right? 1400s. They built that out and they launched the 30 Years' War against the Spanish Empire, trying to do this because the Spanish Empire would not allow them in. And so they tried to destroy the Spanish Empire. That didn't work. 30, 50, 80 years wars, right? It also made the continent too dangerous for them. So they went from Venice to Amsterdam, and now both are too hot. Well, there was the British Isles. So they went to the British Isles in the 1600s. And they start, what do you do before you take over a people? You start buying off parliamentarians. You start buying off industrialists. You start buying off the nobility. You start moving them from their traditional classical law, their ability to earn and accumulate wealth through their traditions, through their practice of their culture, their laws, etc. And you build it on, you put it onto this artificial construct called financialism, right? Which had developed quite well, and stock exchange, for stock stuff and all this, right? And they bring, and 1688, they take over the country. Now, were tiny hats involved in helping? Probably. But I don't put this on the tiny hats. This is our own people. We've been, these same Praetorians, Romans, have been doing this for 2,000 years, since Augustus. They're very good at it. Now, I want to go back to the tiny hats. I suspect very much, and the more I look at it, once I saw it, I suspect very much that sometime during the Crusades, during the Islamic wars, the rise of Islam, that the Crusaders, many of whom were nobility, many of them who were kings, said, you can come live with us. We are tooling all of our men to go fight in these wars. So we need managers and administrators and people who can do these types of things because we need our men for war. And you're not necessarily so much a warrior like people, right? And so we brought them in. But here was the deal. You're going to be the whipping boy. You familiar with that term?
Yeah.
You're going to be the whipping boy. And every once in a while, things are just going to go bad and things are going to go wrong. We're going to get things wrong. We're going to need to blame somebody, and you're going to take the blame for it. That doesn't mean that, members of that community aren't doing nasty stuff. Well, of course they are. So are we, right? But that's my actual take on this, and that we need to be, while we need to look at these things and we need to be aware of these, if you actually look what was happening historically around these pogrom periods, right, like you're talking about, we'll find that there was a lot of other things going on that actually led to the issue and, the issues and problems and crisis at the time. But boy, they sure took the blame for it. And I suspect, like what's happening right now over in the Levant, that they're doing the same today. They are playing the role of whipping boy very, very well. And if you look at their history in Egypt, in Babylonia, Persia, they've been playing this role for thousands of years.
So some of again, this gets this is probably one of the most complex subjects you can speak about. But what I normally do is go to a high. Remember, I said there was a
completely respected.
There's a higher level, and I believe it can be anyone. It's not so the highest level at all. So you're talking about Praetorians and a group
slavers. What they really are is slavers, and they work in very specific ways, and they suborn and hide within the laws in very specific ways.
Right. So there's a number of different groups of people, but there's one element that I always go back to. Again, this thesis that was written in Australia by a psychologist, and she's the only person that's nailed it for me, right? It's 562 pages, and it's called Dark Personality. They're almost like snakes and lizards, but they're highly intelligent. And there's 4 groups of people within Dark Personality, and it's 10% of the global population. So you can be black, brown, white.
I think it's much higher, but I think it's about 30%. Yeah.
Right. So, and there is a debate on what the percentage is. Yeah. But that group of people that comes under dark personality have got no conscience whatsoever. They are the type of people that will enslave you and have no conscience whatsoever. No. Rape, pillaging, anything. They're not interested. The 4 groups of people with the same attributes, and ways of doing things exactly the same. Psychopath, Machiavellian, narcissist, and sadist. They're the four groups of personalities that come under dark personality, right? So these people that you're talking about can fit snugly into that. That's what they are. But they know each other. They can tell.
Yep.
I mean, once you've read about them and you understand, anyone watching this who's ever been involved with a narcissistic woman like I have, right? You will understand that once you read about narcissism, they jump off the page at you, because you'll see that they all do exactly the same thing. And it's not until someone tells you what it is, and you can test for it now, by the way. There's 2 tests that you can do to find out if that person is narcissistic or dark personality. But then people elevate themselves into positions, members of parliament, judges, barristers, you name it, any position where they can take control. So they do it, right?
So I wrote a book back in 2020, published it in 2020, called The Eternal War. It's a primer. It's 100 some odd pages. My friend Tucker Max helped me think through it for a couple of years, just bouncing the ideas and concepts. So I wrote a book called The Eternal War. And I call these the resentfuls. These are individuals who are motivated by one primary motivation. It's envy. And that envy becomes resentment. Resentment becomes malevolence. Malevolence can become real evil if it's not checked. And right now I'm calling them the estrogens, because the way in which they work is the way in which estrogen-based systems, which are locked in genetic warfare constantly, enslavement and genetic warfare, going back who knows how many millions of years, right? That, all of these things are evolutionary. They are forcing functions. They are still with us because they serve a purpose. They serve a forcing function purpose. They force us to continually adapt and evolve. And very much to what you articulated, what do? They rise up within any type of institutional organization to include a wealthy family, or to include, so marrying into a wealthy family, and we've got good Prince Harry might have one of these right now, right?
Yeah.
You've got, they rise up into any position of authority and power where they can embed themselves like a virus and prey upon everybody else around them. And it happens. And in the English-speaking world, it seems to happen that we get this unbelievably overbalancing of them in all the various forms and positions of power. And that we have to fight that out about every 400 years, like clockwork. Yeah. And what the last 400-year cycle, we succeeded in restoring and updating common law and expanding upon the understanding of the balance of power, right, between king, government, which is, as you stated very early on, the executive, legislature, and judiciary, right? That is the king, historically. The princes, the ultra high net worth individuals, but who are actually involved, not just rich people, and then the people. We did a good job of that in the Inglorious Revolution. What we didn't do, though, is see that they were embedding these people into these institutions and positions of power at the same time. We were paying attention to all the good words and all the good stuff, and not paying attention that we were being infiltrated in every one of our institutions and organizations.
Exactly that, and that's what the Axis settlement was about. It was they realised what they was doing, and then once we brought in the Axis settlement, what did they do then? They said, let's create the Acts of Union, and we'll infiltrate through the Union. That's why
we can create divisions. So now the Scots and the Irish and the English are all fighting each other, and we can tweak that up a little here and there.
And they did the same thing with America, right? Because
exactly.
The original.
You're on mute, Rich. You're on mute.
Graham, Ian, hold on a second. Before we go to the US, right, and I'll come to you afterwards. Yeah. This sounds so much like what's been happening in the last few years.
Oh, it's exactly the same.
The infiltrate. Was it Klaus Schwab said we've penetrated all these cabinets?
Because we're at that 400-year cycle. They know it. Yeah. So they've been, and here's the thing, the resentfuls are always at least half a step and usually 2 steps ahead of us.
Right.
Because they're trying to conquer you. They're trying to enslave you, and they have no other desire. We're too busy living our life and getting stuff done and raising families and doing things. And we're not thinking about that until it's almost so bad that it almost wipes us off the planet.
Exactly.
And they have to do this because of the monetary collapse in the background.
That's a symptom. The monetary stuff is a symptom because parasites don't build or create anything.
Correct.
And so a healthy host can only sufficiently produce and build and create for so long before the parasitism just collapses everything, because you're not reinvesting, even at a cellular level in a body, you're not reinvesting in repair, constructive destruction, et cetera, et cetera. So the monetary stuff is not, that's not a leading cause. The monetary is a symptom of this parasitism.
Got it. Okay.
Right, and it's
the acts of settlement, or the acts of union, bringing all these nations together, where we have Keir Stasi aligning Britain with the European Union, handing over
and just giving control of lands to them.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Graham. You were going to go to the United States.
Yeah.
So before just to make sure everyone's clear on what I say, because I tell people this as well, right? And everyone says it can't be, because they think communism is a new thing. And what I've said is no, Romanism is communism. That's what you've got to understand. It's a slavery system.
Well, I would be careful there. I would not articulate it that way. Romanism is socialism, which is slavery. And and depending on where they are in the cycle, they'll either go to the Nazi fascist form of socialism, or they'll go to the communist Marxist form of socialism, right? And it just depends on where they are in the cycle and how the parasitism and how the host is reacting, etc. But those two, I call them the resentfuls, and there's the Marxist resentfuls and the Nazi resentfuls, because Nazism is very unique. One, they're both genocidal. They're both genocidal slavers. One wants to destroy everything and recognizes, as you were saying, each other ideologically. And the other wants to, and so they want to destroy everything, tear it down and build their utopia. Actually, they don't care. The second one wants to control everything to enslave, but in order to be in control, they believe they got to genocide everybody that's not ethnically them, because then, they're going to have ethnic affinities, etc. They're both the same. They're both genocidal slavers. Which one emerges where in which populace is really dependent on where the host is, the immune system of the civilization of the host. So like for the English peoples, communism doesn't work very well. They've got to pump so much resources, so much money, so much effort into keeping the illusion of Marxist communism from working. However, we are susceptible to Nazi fascism. It doesn't mean we're Nazi fascists. That's not what I mean. But when it comes to the narratives, when it comes to the linguistic constructs, when it comes to the lies and the control and the systems and the structures and institutions and the use of law specifically, we are susceptible to that. Now, every 400 years we fought it out, and we fixed that, right? But that transition like the saeculums, right? We're in a fifth saeculum now, which is what it turns out to, and we're at the crisis phase of it. It's a 20, 25-year period that we don't know exactly how it's going to go. We might do all the right things constitutionally, like in the United States, we're fighting all this stuff constitutionally, and we might still lose because like 1688 through mid-1700s, we're not paying attention to the fact that we're winning over here in all the structural stuff, and we're losing over here in all the manpower placement stuff.
No, so just what you just said there, that's exactly. So one of the things that I've tried to tell people is the people stood up, right? So you got a corrupt electoral system.
Yes.
By the way, I absolutely do not like Nigel Farage, right? He is who I describe as Benedict Arnold.
Yes, traitor.
Exactly.
He's a traitor to the English.
Exactly.
To Englishness, yes.
So when I explain it to people, people are listening, and I say, listen, you have to understand what happened in America to understand they've replicated, and Trump knows this, by the way, they replicated what they did to take control of the British Empire, and they've replicated it in America. So the what was
That's
it
the financialist kill chain. Yep.
Well, so you had something in America that Trump immediately took down, right? And that was the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Yep.
That was the principle of the Acts of Union, right? Yep. And Trump could see it and see what they was doing. And he said, strategically,
well,
I've got to
let's be careful. Let's not put this on Trump.
No, Trump is good.
He pushed it. He promoted it. He drove it. But it was others that brought that forward, because I want to pass something by you, Graham, here. Sorry, not to take right, but I want to lay a little picture of context, historical, and then something I suspect happened with the quote unquote revolution in the United States. Okay?
Mm.
Okay. Rome, the Praetorians had controlled and were gutting Rome and just all the stuff we're seeing today, right? With the EU, with freaking, the intelligence communities, all of it. It's just exact same stuff. Okay. Some of the Roman nobility and some of the leaders of Rome realized we've got to end this Praetorian. How the hell are we going to do that? They're in everything. And they'll kill you. They'll just kill you. They'll kill your kid. They'll sell your daughter into prostitution somewhere, right? Or your son, right?
Or for one person, they will fly a plane into a mountain, killing 300 people just to get to you. That's
correct.
Exactly. Well,
correct.
No
so how do you?
Whatsoever.
And they control the narrative, and they again through and magistrates and all. So okay, and generals and okay. So how are you going to do that? Well, they separated the capitals of Rome. They put one in the east and one in the west. Why? Well, the empire had grown big. They'd figure out a narrative that would work. And so they set up another capital in Constantinople. Why Constantinople? Physically, it's unreal defensible, right? Physically. And it was in the wealthiest part of the empire with the highest percentage of the population. Okay. And they didn't use Praetorians. Why? Well, because there's all these languages out here and there's all these people. And we need to have our own intelligence networks. And, we're going to fall in on the Greek and, et cetera. Okay. All right. About 100 years on from there, and forgive me, I can't remember. I'm not a very good autist because I'm probably not autistic at all, so I forget these things. The Eastern Empire, the emperor, was finally strong enough and capable enough, and they had put enough conditions in place where he went back and they drew all these out. They got the Praetorians to all form together into actual armies and to put a puppet emperor on the throne, enticed them all out, and they went and crushed them at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312. Crushed them and said, if you ever come back together again, if you ever try to rise to power again, and we figure it out, we'll kill you. And they did. Now, remnants of that fled to Venice, right? The lagoons that would become Venice. Okay. All right. I wonder, when I look at good King George III, right? Third, right? The one that had the non compos mentis moments in his life, right? During I wonder if that was somewhat of a ruse to do a similar Constantinople Byzantium out of Rome kind of thing, because of the Praetorians were in total and absolute control of every aspect of England and English civilization, with the very same murderous, et cetera, and control the magistrates, total owning of the parliament, like the Praetorians owned the Senate, back in Rome, all of it, right? I mean, it's all, and I wonder if good King George's non compos mentis was a bit of a ruse. And I wonder if this whole kerfluffle with the colonies was a bit of a ruse to separate out the heart, the power of the empire. And now we're 200 years on, and maybe now we've got, unfortunately, Praetorians riddled throughout here. They killed the president. They shot several more. They couped another president. They just tried to shoot this. You know what I mean? It's like all the stuff's exactly the same as ancient Rome. But I think what's happening right now in this culmination of this 400-year cycle is we're moving to not repeat the mistakes of the Inglorious Revolution.
Okay.
Right? I think that's what's happening. And I think what's happening, like what's happening in Israel right now, what happened in Ukraine, what's happening elsewhere is we are drawing the Praetorians out and we are exhausting their resources to fight. And so when an empire when a nobility is retaking its empire, they have to contract for a while. They have to pull back, right? When you pull back to do it safely and securely, you do things in such a way, having to be unbelievably careful every day, because they'll still murder your kids. They'll still sell your daughter into prostitution. They'll still rape your son. I mean, it's that, right? And everything's corrupted everywhere. So how do you operate? Well, you operate in these very careful ways in these positions of influence and power, et cetera, and you draw them out. You got to wait, however, till a certain point to where the old heart of the empire is no longer capable of sustaining war, no longer capable of sustaining sustained clandestine covert operations around the world. And you draw them all out in the open, and you let them destroy themselves so that you can retake power.
That and what you're describing is exactly what is going on between Russia and Ukraine.
Exactly.
And why the British are in it up to their neck.
Absolutely.
They
It's
know
why Israel,
they're gone.
Iran, all of it. All of it. Now, here's the thing I want to be careful, okay?
Hold on a second,
Yeah.
right? I want to give Graham a chance as well, right?
Yeah,
To
apologies.
some of his ideas, right?
Yeah.
And I appreciate your passion. And
Yeah.
Graham, I said this to EM when we first recorded, but it's just as valid here. And I include you in this. Why on earth wasn't history this interesting at school?
Well, exactly.
It was deliberate. They did it deliberately, right? But I want to give you some
removed
space.
it. They've removed it from history.
Yeah,
That's the
so
problem.
we don't know.
But I only so it's deliberate. It's absolutely deliberate.
No, you're absolutely right. It's all tied into denying us the concept of ourselves as a civilizational people.
Yeah.
You got to make us boring. What is that? Stiff upper lip and all that other little nuanced ways of making the English boring, etc.
Yeah.
And very good, Rich. Yeah, apologies. Yeah, Graham, please jump in there.
There is nothing better than pie and mash. It's not boring.
Now, wait a minute. I'm sorry. We know the favourite English food is curry. All right. End of argument.
It is.
Yes, but it's English flavored curry.
So
I make proper stuff.
Okay.
Just by the way, Ian, I learned from my Scottish wife because she learnt it from my aunt.
Okay.
So there's a quick 2 points before we get into to more of that, and this is. Do you know someone called, I forget, his Matthew Effert? Matthew, he's on Rumble. He's built up his channel.
Probably not.
He went to a Moscow University, and he basically says the same thing, right? So he's been on my channel quite a few times. But there's two things I'll say just to make sure, and this is for the audience, right? Putin actually said, when I say recently, in the last couple of years, in a speech, Russia is not part and never will be part of the Roman Empire.
Correct.
Do you understand that? So he said.
When did he say this?
A couple years ago. Yeah, and he's repeated it.
Yeah.
He's a genius.
So the first point of Putin, and again, I'm not. Listen, anyone in any form of power is not going to be an angel, right? It just can't happen, and you're going to have to make decisions that people don't like. Yeah. Even if your strategy is to get to A to B, you may have to do something you don't like to get there, right? So that's the thing that people understand. But one thing about the USSR, the Soviet Union, and again, I'm just going to make sure your audience are aware of this. It's really important, right? Joseph Stalin was the commissar of nationality and identity, and he created Soviet. And he said, all of you, Russians, Bolgarians, whatever, you are now Soviets, right?
Because he was a German, he was Georgian, he wasn't even Russian. Sorry, right. Go ahead.
No, exactly. He was a Georgian. But this is the point, right? When did they do that in England? And they done it in 1981 with the British Nationality Act, and they've done exactly the same thing as Joseph Stalin. They removed English nationality, Scottish nationality, Welsh nationality, and Irish, and said, you are now British. And then the English are saying, no, we're not. We're just like the Russians. We're saying, that's not us. We're English, right? So just to make sure that people are aware, Putin is being vilified by this group of people when he stood up to him, and they actually took the Soviet Union, Russia back and freed themselves from that system. Correct. The other quick one to make sure everyone's aware, and I'm talking about legal history, right? There is a difference between an English dominion and a British colony. Yes. They're two separate things in law, right? And once people understand that the English dominions was about extrapolating the common law system and the freedom to the people, and the British created colonies and central control and stamping down. And once people realise there's a difference between the two, they go, wow, I never knew that. And then you show them the history of it, getting back to America, you had the War of Independence, but crucially, what you had was the Civil War that was created by these people, and the original Constitution was destroyed.
Correct. However, I will say this, the American Constitution and the Bill of Rights are the most precise distillation of Englishness yet. Now, have we adhered to it as we, have we adhered to that constitutionality, et cetera? Not necessarily. Have we adhered to the whole Bill of Rights? We've been working at that hard, et cetera. But the greatest expression of Englishness, just as Byzantium was the greatest expression of the better parts of Hellenistic Rome, America is the best distillation when it's not infiltrated like it is right now, and they're trying to destroy us and Sovietize us. Or in this case, I fear actually they're not trying to Sovietize us, they're trying to Nazify us, because what they did is they Nazified Germany and then killed 5 million German young men in war. That's what they're trying to do here, right, with our martial men in power. So I'm more concerned with that than trying to go Soviet. But at its fundamental core, and I believe very much that this was done intentionally with the wittiness of the crown, right, and people around the crown, but very carefully. It's very interesting the conversations a king can have when he's crazy, when he's in a crazy moment. Right? Very interesting the people he can meet with because he's crazy, right? So again, and I don't want to belabor a point because I do want to very much, I love the pieces, but the American Constitution is English. It is the greatest distillation of, and so for clarification, we got to plug some gaps and we got to fill some holes, just like we had to do in the 1600s and the 1200s and the 800s, right? We got to plug some gaps and some holes because they were manipulating them, etc. Right? But yeah.
So again, people don't. When I express to people, because they often say the British say we haven't got a constitution, and I'll say
rubbish.
What I say is the British haven't got a constitution. The English
do,
and the Scots do. Right?
Yes.
We exported it to America, and they're like, "Wow, hang on a minute." And what they don't realise, the people over here are not realising, when you put a legal fiction on your forehead that says British, you're telling them, "I accept. I have no rights. I am a slave." And we're saying, "You stop it. Don't do that."
You know what I dislike the most? Bulldogs.
What would be the English animal?
Oh, I don't know. We had wolves back in the day.
A hedgehog.
No, I'll probably say, although we haven't got any anymore. Actually, we have. The English eagles just returned to England.
So we had cattle. We had a uniquely English cattle, and
So not the hedgehog then.
No,
badgers probably.
I think the English animal is the Picts. The Pictish peoples.
The Picts.
All right, Graham. Anything else you want to say or expand on?
No, but again, for a chat. This is not an interview; it's a chat, right? But again, from seeing, again, there's lots of things that you said about the English Bill of Rights and King Billy. If you took that argument to Northern Ireland, you would get automatic pushback because. But what we have to try and express to people is there is this overarching group of people. I absolutely agree. That dark personality doesn't matter what colour you are. Just to make sure, I emphasise this to people: the English Constitution, nowhere in our history do we mention race. Right?
We couldn't, because from our inception, we've been like 5 main races and 13, 15 other
different people. That's why
just because we're all white doesn't mean we're all one race. I know we all look alike.
Graham, if I can come back on that, right? So I grew up in London in the 70s when the National Front were marching through Southall and Lewisham and all those days, right? And it was, they captured the English flag. So, and then from the left-wing political background that I grew up out of, or whatever, right, or immersed myself in, it's like, well, being English is associated with being white, ethno-nationalist, racist. And then I remember I interviewed David Curtin, who's the leader of the Heritage Party, and Ian, you may not know him, but he's mixed race, African Caribbean Briton, and a lot of the stuff he's talking about. Close the borders, a return to Englishness, like traditional conservative
values,
which right now would be very, very welcome, right? And I said to him, and he said, "Look, we're not ethno-nationalists."
No.
And then for you to say that, so there's something to be said or to be done about the broader definition of Englishness as something that has, the peoples that were born out of or have been shaped by England's common law legacy, the Rooms of Alfred and the principles of sovereignty,
private property,
and the
the
balance
balance
of
of power.
So let me just make sure I'm clear on this, because people they don't understand the Constitution and the law on this. The Act of Settlement stated, and it's wrong, and it's obviously sometimes it is wrongly pitched, right?
Mhm.
There was a reason, right? And again, I want everyone to
They were
understand
fighting all this.
the Act of Settlement, the Act of Settlement brought in, you must be born of English parents to be in any position of power. And the reason they did that was not because the Dutch were black or brown, they was white, but they did not understand, and they was destroying England from within. And they said, we're not having it. You've got to be of English parents, right? So then some people say to me, well, so for example, yourself, you would turn around to me and say, well, you know, my dad's whatever, or my mum's is whatever. And I'd say,
Pakistani.
well, so therefore you couldn't be, right, and the protection under the proper English Constitution, you and your parents, by the way, and they adopted this partially in America, which is why you have to be born an American to be the president. Right? The reason it was put in place was to stop the outside influence of other cultures destroying your nation. So all they're saying, so your kids or your grandchildren, if they was born and they married English people, could be members of parliament and be in position of power because they've already accepted the culture.
Correct.
Right? That's
national. So if I might, this very thing's happening here in the United States with all these foreign judges.
Yeah, exactly.
Foreign-born judges.
Exactly.
And these foreign-born judges, which is exactly why we put the Acts of Settlement, was specifically to prevent what's happening in the United States right now. And look how these foreign-born judges, who are intentionally put on there because they're not American English, they're not English, and look how they're ruling against the Constitution.
And when I mention this, I'm called a racist. Right, that's the bit, and I'll say to him, listen, this ain't about race. The people we try to keep out were Dutch, and they was the same colour as us.
My daughter is brown.
Well, I just
and she's English American.
Because I'm opposed to open borders, I'm a white supremacist.
No.
Here's
the point. At a certain point, the labels don't matter, and you just got to go, okay, whatever.
Yeah,
great. Let's close the borders.
It's all about sovereignty.
Yeah. So, it's
rights of property, balance of power.
Just as an ad hoc, right? So a guy comes to see me all the way from New Zealand, sailed in a yacht. It's called it's a Freedom Yacht, and we met up in Hull. He's now out in Portugal. He's sailing all around the world under common law jurisdiction. You don't need a passport, right?
Yeah.
When we went to the bar in Portugal, we're surrounded by these boats, and there were some jokes because there was a German guy who's 70 years old. He was in the German Navy for years, etc. And I said, "What, you in a U-boat?" And he just started laughing, right? So the thing, what I'm trying to get at is, you had it sounds like a joke. You had a German, an Englishman, a guy from New Zealand,
Kiwi,
a Kiwi. You had a Portuguese guy. We're all sitting there as working people, all talking to each other, and we've all got the same problems, and we're all friends, right? And the difference is we're all saying the same thing and they're trying to shut us down. That's why they shut down the English pubs, right? So we couldn't have these conversations.
So here's one of the pieces I've been, from neural studies in the work that we've been doing around brain injuries and recovery from brain injuries is male and female psychology at the neurological level up, and identity works very, very differently. And the dark traits, right, and the borderline personality disorder stuff, right, whatever the behavioral, and there's like 25 in there, or 25, 50, because there's two schedules. They manifest very differently in men and women. But women females and estrogens is what I call them collectively, which isn't just women, right? It's males with elevated levels of estrogen, etc. They don't have the physicality. They don't have the physical dominance and presence. They don't have the emotional regulation and cognitive regulation that healthy masculine men have. So how do they work? They work by deception. They work by manipulation. They work by warping linguistic constructs in order to have control via the narrative. Well, that's what all of this is. And this is what, this is how our own laws, our own civilization, which is codified in laws, but The laws are simply a reduction and a codification of something vastly more rich, vastly more sophisticated. It all gets warped and twisted and contorted by these estrogens who passive aggressively, virally work their way into these positions of power and then mask themselves using words, knowing that unfortunately, because of the gaps we have, right? Like Alfred the Great, a king, said the king is not above the law. So what did they do 600 years later, 800 years later? They gave power of the law to people they could corrupt, Parliament.
Yeah.
Now they control the king.
Yeah.
Well, and how they do that, all this linguistic stuff, all these wording stuff. Why? Because they know if they physically threaten key men and leaders, right, and their children, that you're not going to walk up and punch them in the face and break through that narrative, that artificial narrative construct. And they know they got, unfortunately, the courts on their side with other dark trait people sitting in those courts to back them up. And this is why every 400 years in the English-speaking peoples, it goes to civil war, become revolution.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. I want to say something in response to that, and then I want to move on to Israel and Iran because we've got about 15 minutes before we finish.
Yeah, forget it. Yeah.
So I've listened to your argument about estrogens and stuff in the video you did with Tom Luongo on Mick Harrigan's podcast. And there's all the stuff that I've been trained in. I'm a social worker, all PC environment and everything, right? Yeah. He's just being sexist, isn't? But wait a minute, men and women do have different brains. I have worked with perpetrators of domestic abuse, men and women, and the women do it through manipulation and language, and it just went, oh my God!
And to goad him into the physical, so then she can use.
There was one that I was working with, and I could see all this. And I'm a guy, and I'm cutting through this. She makes so many complaints about me that it becomes untenable for me to work with the family. And now I've been replaced by a woman social worker
who will support her.
So, no, she won't. She won't. This one won't work differently. That's the thing I got.
So
it's what we're saying with male perpetrators because they're angry and aggressive and.
But they also have elevated levels of estrogen in their system because estrogen upregulates for violence in males and females. Testosterone downregulates. Oh. That's very well done. Okay. So the males who perpetrate these things often, this is why I call them estrogens. It's not just a male or female thing.
Just to make sure people are aware of this, that's one of the problems with the water system. But because women have been taking the pill, estrogen is in the water supply. And
it's in the air. Because they breathe it out, they aerosolize it, and the aerosolized estrogen is what regulates male testosterone production. Yeah, that's very well developed science. Go ahead.
That whole subject is a fascinating subject that I've looked at, and you start to see other bits of the jigsaw puzzle going into place. But just to go back, and again, to my audience, all the English roses out there, this isn't a personal slur on you.
Which color, though? Are we going to repeat the War of the Roses?
Red roses, blue roses, rainbow-colored roses.
The Tudor rose, which laid them all down.
There are people out there that say that we started serious problems in England when we allowed women to vote. Lady Howe was the president of the Supreme Court, and there's lots of now female judges, and some of their judgments, I think there is no logic to that whatsoever, right, under English law. And when you look at these positions, and just to make sure people are aware, everyone says to me, the Magna Carta, it's only a fraction of our history, but it's a very important fraction, right? But people don't realise this. Everyone talks about juries, and they stand in front of me and say the Magna Carta created juries. I said, no, it didn't.
That's not true.
Not in the way that we have them today. And women were not allowed on juries until 1919. And then all of a sudden you start to see a spiral effect, right, of bad decisions.
So first, I don't want to go pick on women because this isn't just about women. It's about estrogen. And it's about estrogen levels in males and females. I want to go back to what you articulated, though. I don't think it's when we gave them the vote. I think it's with Queen Elizabeth I. And look at the men she put around her, and look at the way in which she engaged in this, intelligent, the same kind of way the CIA and MI6 works now. That's how she did it, right? Now, granted that Catholics were coming after her and trying to reverse, her father's movement and all that kind of stuff, and I get it, right? And then before that we had Queen Mary, and then we had Queen Elizabeth, and all this stuff gets set in motion then, and then who's the one who got her husband and convinced her husband to come and do the war in England, etc. She's Stuart daughter, right? And then we've had Queen Victoria and, etc. So, and then Her Majesty, who I actually like, and I think she was trapped in a period of time, because I don't think Queen Elizabeth II was an estrogen, one of the estrogens. I think she was actually what I call a testosterones, right? It's just someone who's more organized to let's build, let's create, let's minimize the destruction, let's not engage in genetic warfare, etc. Right? So I don't know that it's so much when the vote came. I believe what it was very clearly, or very precisely, is Peace of Westphalia and the Inglorious Revolution, which embedded these, dark triad people at the top of everything. And what they really did is it shifted from hereditary systems to these financialist systems, which changed the incentive structures from the masculine to the feminine, from testosterone to estrogen, right? And it's always about the incentive structures. Who was behind the Peace of Westphalia? Who was behind the Inglorious Revolution? Women, old matrilineal lines, because matrilineal lines can go unbroken for 1,000 years. Patrilineal lines almost never make it even 200 years. So all of the old power in Europe, families that go back to to Charlemagne's court, etc., the power families, it's all women. Go ahead. Yeah.
Whilst I don't want to make it look like I'm referencing one group of people, but what you just described there is the little hats. The little hats lineage is passed down by females.
Well, that's true too.
Not the male.
But we do this to ourselves, right? Completely separate from that group of people. So I don't want to. I have a hard time with. Sorry, Rich. But I have a very hard time conceptually. I think it's again estrogen logic to think that somebody can be both a master and a victim race at the same time. So I think we've got a little conflict when we have these conversations. Okay. I'm sorry, Rich.
I'm going to move this on, right? Because I had to go and pick up my daughter, and I think you've got something else to do, right? But we've got 10 minutes left. I understand, and I want to go back to something that was mentioned by both of you before. So I can get how Russia is been engaging in the SMO in order to destroy NATO.
Yes, right? Disarm it.
Really, really clear, right?
Yeah.
Please explain to me, because I think what you said, both of you said, is the same process with regards to Iran and Israel.
Yes.
So, Graham, actually, you start, because I think, because I may be more familiar with EM's exposition of it. I mean, do you see it that way as well, Graham?
Yeah, I do, and it's gone on for far longer than what people think. I mean, even back further than most people think. But the issue in Ukraine started in
leave the Ukraine one. It's the Iran and Israel currently. For people who are looking at it who don't necessarily know the history, just have one nation bombing another and the other nation bombing them back. How does that fit in this great game?
There's two groups of people yet again fighting each other at the highest level, right? And just to make sure people are aware of this, again, people won't like what I'm about to say. Every flashpoint in the world has been created by the British, right? Whether it be Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Israel in particular, right? Iran, because Iran wasn't Iran, it was Persia, right? And they've got their own ways of doing things, whatever that way may be. It's their own ways of doing things. It was the British that interfered with that, right? They've interfered with basically every flashpoint in the world is a construct of British foreign policy. Whoever was controlling the British Empire at the time, right? And they knew what they was doing. So what you've now got is an old construct, and these two groups of people which have been artificially created. That someone is now drawing fire and depleting them of weaponry, right? And it has to be key, because if you don't do that, you're going to end up in a global war. And it's staged, and they're going ping, 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 ping.
Yes. And the only beautiful, Graham, beautiful. Not only do you have to disarm them by letting them burn it out, right? Just burn out their weapons, burn out their arms, but you have to drive them to such a place like we just saw in Russia, where they use these drones to bomb the nuclear bombers. What just happened? You just burned probably 20 years of intelligence network creation. You just burned that. It'll take you another 20 years to rebuild it, and you're not going to, because now the Russians and everybody else are paying attention, and you just spent a vast fortune of black side money that you can't replace because you're not going to get it in the next appropriations, right? The other, what's happening in Israel and Iran right now is we're doing the same. What just happened with Israel's strike on Iran is we just highlighted, we just induced them to highlight all of the illicit, all of the clandestine, all the covert network stuff, so it can be, it too, in addition to the disarmaments, etc., it too can be highlighted and destroyed, and then not refunded and in the next appropriations bill. As well, in the United States, what started the riots here recently is they were going after, the ICE and others were going after money laundering and human trafficking. Why? Because you have to, in addition to what we're talking about, you also have to dry up their illicit funding networks.
Yeah.
Right? What's happening now is the empire, and in this case, I mean the English empire, is finally moving after 340 years to remove the Praetorians from ourselves. We can't handle the rest of the world. The Russians have already done it. The Chinese have already done it. The Iranians did it in 1970s, right? So now we, the English-speaking peoples, the English civilization, are moving to remove the Praetorians ourselves. And this is the only way to do it when you have a knife or a gun or kidnapping or child trafficking or whatever to you and your kids' heads.
Yeah. No, and I don't
and you got to do it all within the construct of the law, as Graham knows so very well, right? You got to do it within the construct of English law, English civilization, English constitutionality, and that's a difficult thing.
And the group of English that you're talking to, I think you mean the Americans plus the English here,
and some there, yes,
and
in Pakistan and in India,
but also Trump and those that are backing him, they're part of that. Okay, now
he walked in front of Her Majesty, and Her Majesty was smiling. That wasn't him being a bumbling fool.
Yes. Okay, so this boggles my mind because, I'm Pakistani, I'm Muslim, my family are just so upset about what's going on in Israel and Iran. I'm upset about Ukraine, been upset years that's been going on, all this, people dying, right? This is a hard sell. Who's going to believe this? This is too clever by half.
They've been doing it for 2,000 years. They don't have to be clever. They just have to increment.
We're
the unclever ones.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. and what's happening now is people are starting to talk like we're doing now about that actual, and that's the bit. That's why they take you down. That's why they took you down on. I mean, I had 100,000 subscribers, 25,000 subscribers, 2,500 subscribers on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
Why do they take me down when all I talk about is England and the Constitution? It's because when you start nailing little parts, they go, he's getting too close to the truth, shut him down. Which is why when I watched you on that thing, I said to all my audience, go and watch it. Because that's exactly what's happening. And they was like, oh, what? So, and I said, it's simple. It's not even complex. This is what's going on.
Absolutely fascinating. I already had a high regard for both of you. Now it's gone up another notch.
Well, thank you.
Thank you both. Anything either of you want to say in a couple of minutes to finish up?
Graham.
No, all I would say is follow our Royal Courts of Justice case. We are now, I literally presented the case to a High Court judge in the Royal Courts of Justice, reference to Runcorn and Helsby, and nullifying the election through cheating, which is how they do it.
Oh, yeah.
So all of that's being pushed forward. You can find me on the Full English Show on Rumble. It's the only platform, apart from Twitter, that's already took me down once. But the Full English Show on Rumble and English Exit on Twitter.
Well, I'll have the links in below. And take a look at ODYSEE and 3Speak, Graham, okay? 3Speak
awesome.
Decentralized. Ian?
Yeah, if I can give just one little piece. Boys and girls, right? Testosterones, right? That means the healthy, logical people who want to take back our civilization and rebuild and expand and stop all this killing, and right? We have to do everything that Graham's doing and others in the courts. Like we're seeing a lot of movement here in the Supreme Court and the lower courts here in the United States. That is the restoration of Englishness, right? The restoration of common law. The estrogens, again, the ones that are, the resentfuls, the whatever the hell we want to call them, the Praetorians, right? They will not, as we're seeing in Ukraine, as we're seeing in Israel and Iran, as we're seeing in other parts of the world, they will not go down without a knockdown, drag-out physical fight.
Yeah.
They will not do it. and we need to not kid ourselves, and we need to not be the ones to initiate and all, and etc. But we need to protect ourselves, need to be prepared to protect our children, protect our communities, because they will historically, going back all the way to 300s, they will not go away without a physical fight. They're not going to get their World War III, so they're going to fight us at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Fabulous. Graham, Ian, thank you both. I'll have the links to your Substack and to your channels, Graham, and X and everything. Really, really appreciate it. Please share this video far and wide, comments below. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Look forward to having you both on again at some point too, soon.
Pleasure, gentlemen.
All the best. Bye-bye. Is this you? Low energy, low libido, no get up and go? Boost your testosterone naturally and rev up your engine with Immense Boost. bit.ly/CryptoRichBoost and order your testosterone boost today.